Well, as starting from being an infant, I was in a good place, I was happy. But my life changed pretty much once I was sent to a state school, as we call it, a comprehensive school. I'm dyslexic, but they didn't diagnose me with that at the time, so I struggled with a lot of academics at school. And a lot of the teachers would write reports about me saying that I was lazy or inattentive, or they would say, David's just got no interest at all in anything, which is totally untrue. I really wanted to learn, and I really wanted to sort of discover things, but because of my dyslexia, my marks were really low. And I left school with very little qualifications because of that. So once I was out there, I was trying to find my feet in the world, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. I moved down to London because I figured that moving to London, like all capital cities, you think it's going to be the land of hope and dreams, and it's all going to come together for you. And I had a great time there, but I'd got new struggles, and that was that to survive in London, it was very expensive, and the only work that I was picking up was mainly manual labouring work, working on construction sites and trying to learn how to do that. I just didn't know. I was not very good at that job. So I just felt that I never really fitted in anywhere, and I was struggling to find my identity, as it were. I also found that living in London, that there was a lot of people that I was mixing with who were already successful. I'd made friends with people who were working in the music industry, and they don't seem like they're highly educated, but they're doing really well for themselves. And I thought, well, why not me? Why can't I be doing this? So I was constantly trying to push my way into those circles and hope that I might find a breakthrough, but that never ever came. It's with the UK, the class structure is still very prominent, and it really is. And there was always that sense of, you felt like you were working class, and well, I did. I felt like I was working class, and I was never really, as much as they liked me and appreciated me, and enjoyed my humour or whatever. I was never going to be part of their sect, as it were. And I had a massive identity crisis, I guess, yeah. And eventually I started to run out of money. I got to the point where I was down to my last £10, I remember, and I'd got a letter come through my door with an eviction notice saying, that you're going to be evicted from your apartment. So that was a very low point for me. And I got a call off my sister saying, why don't you come and see us for the weekend? And I was thinking at that point I needed to go up and just be with the family, and I ended up staying there for a few weeks actually. But just prior to me going up there, I'd met somebody in London called Anna. We made a really nice connection, and she came up and stayed for a few days. But she needed to get back to London, she'd got an appointment. So I was seeing her off that day at the station, so we went down to the rail station, and the train pulled in, and I helped her on with her bags and gave her a hug and a kiss, and we heard the emergency buzzers go, for the automatic doors to close, but at that point, the bottom corner of my coat, it was like a sheepskin coat, it just got trapped right in there, and it was slammed right in, and I just could not pull my coat free. I looked around for a guard and thinking I might get help, and there wasn't anybody there. In fact, there was only one other guy stood there who'd been seeing off his girlfriend, and he just shouted at me, "Take your coat off, mate, take your coat off." And but I knew that I couldn't do that because it was just, the quality of the sheepskin was like, it would not have pulled free of the arms, so I got no chance. So I just kept banging on the doors, and then nothing happened, and the engines of that train started to rev up, and I remember looking into the eyes of my friend Anna. She was looking right through the glass, and I just saw the sheer look of horror in her face, and I thought, this is it, I'm going to die. I didn't think I was going to be able to survive this. So the train pulled out the station at great speed. It's amazing how fast they pull out. You don't really think about it, but when you're attached to the outside of that train, it really, really goes. But time stretched. It didn't actually slow down, but it stretched. The UK Rail Police did like a massive inquiry on all this, and I said to them, how long did it take from the moment the train pulled out and me going under? And they said 13.5 seconds. And I said, wow, it felt like minutes, it felt like it was a long, long time. But I lost my footing, then I was dragged along the platform edge, and then I was pulled between the space of the platform edge and then underneath the train itself. And I remember that moment. It was just like, I just heard this tremendous rip. And I remember seeing it's almost like the carriage disappeared into the sky, and then I got sucked into this dark sort of pit, you know, and I was thrown around relentlessly like a rag doll. I was just tossed around, and I just felt like it was me, flesh and bones, against this huge mechanical beast. It felt like being thrown into a washing machine at full spin, but it was very violent and very painful. And then suddenly I was thrown to the ground, and I was laid in between the tracks as the train was still continuing on. It was a very long train. So I just kept my head down into the gravel, and because I knew that it wasn't all over yet, that part of the undercarriage could just come and whack me over the back of the head. But that didn't happen, and I was alive. And there I was lying on the tracks, you know, and in this dirty, oily track, and looking up at this beautiful blue sky. It was a February day. I remember just feeling a real connection with nature. I don't know why, but I did. I think it was just the sheer joy that I'd survived, you know. And I do know ultimately at the end of the day there was something bigger at play that saved me from imminent death. But as the train had moved on down the track, I looked and the sheepskin coat was completely ripped to shreds, and then and my arm was ripped right open, and first thing I noticed was I could see all the insides of my arm and all the workings, all the nerve endings and the muscles. And I was in an awful lot of pain. The pain was like really intense. It's like the kind of pain I'd never experienced in my life before. And by that point I was losing copious amounts of blood. But the paramedics arrived really quick, and they jumped down on the track and started cutting through my clothes and keeping me talking and what have you. And they somehow managed to get me off the track and onto a stretcher, and threw me, well not threw me, but they wheeled me into the back of an ambulance, and the siren went on, and we just took off down the highway like a rocket. And then we arrived at the Adam Brooks Hospital, which is like a really big hospital in Cambridge, and there was a whole team of medics there waiting, you know, and nurses and what have you, and waiting for me to come in. So they wheeled me straight in and started working on me, and I thought it's not over yet, because I could hear fear in their voices. I didn't know what they were talking about, because it was all science, of course, you know. And my family were there. They came in, and I remember my mother being in tears, you know, and there you go, me feeling that sense of guilt. I was saying, Mom, I'm so sorry. So it was me bringing all the dramas to this family, you know. And she put her hand over my mouth gently and said, no, it's not your fault. I was concerned about my friend Anna, because she'd had to watch the whole thing unfold, and I wanted to know how she was. And so there she was, sat at the back of the room, and looking dishevelled. So I said, I need to speak to Anna. So she came over, and she was just shaking her head from side to side. She said, I thought you were dead. They announced over the speakers that you were dead, and I can't believe you're alive, you know. And it was pretty much at that point that I left my body. You know, I left all the trauma and the agony that I was going through in the emergency department. And I went from that to a beautiful, darkened space. But it wasn't a foreboding darkness, you know, it just felt very comforting. And I remember looking around and seeing like these orbs of colours that were slowly pulsating around me. They were just they were almost like landing lights to an airport. And I figured pretty much at this point that I hadn't made it. I thought, okay, this is it. I've died. I didn't resist it. I didn't try to sort of come back. You know, I know I've read since that some people do. They'd say, no, I've got too much to live for. I've got my kids and everything, and they try to resist. But I didn't, because I didn't want to die. But what I'd just been through was just such a horrific ordeal that it was just great to be in this sense of calmness, you know, and just feel good. And I kind of got my bearings. I looked around to see where I was, and I noticed I was no longer laid on a hospital trolley, but I was laid on this huge rock. It was like a big slate sort of rock. It was like, I describe it as being almost like a medieval altar, and oddly enough, it felt very comfortable to lie on this rock. And I realised that I was no longer clothed, so I was checking my body for my injuries, and everything was back in place. There was, you know, my left arm was back in place. There wasn't even a single scratch or bruise, you know, and I just remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. This is everything is back in place, and I'm just covered in this blue sheet. It was like a satin sort of silky texture of a sheet, and there was white light reflecting off this satin. So I looked up and I saw like 3 grids of white light that were like coming down over my head, and I sort of laid back and put my head back and I looked into this light, and the light was just so intense and bright that normally it's the kind of light you wouldn't be able to look into with the human eye. But in this sphere, I was able to do that. I was able to look. In fact, I couldn't take my gaze away because the intensity of this light was so pure, and I felt like it was healing me as well. I felt like a sense of that something good was coming from this light. So I allowed myself to bathe in this beautiful light. And it was pretty much at this point that I felt the presence of somebody near me. So I lifted my head slightly and I looked, and there was a person stood just at my feet, just to the right of me, and with this white blonde hair and this skin that was like glowing light from within. I felt like I'd known this person. I thought, I know you. I actually spoke and I said, who are you? I know you, don't I? I know who you are, but I can't figure it, you know. And this being just kept looking back. This being, I say a being because it was neither male nor female, so a total androgynous sort of look. He or she just kept smiling back at me, reassuringly as well. And I felt safe, and I felt like I was being guarded by this person. So I decided to lay back and put my head back and just bask in this glory. And after a bit, I felt the presence of somebody else had arrived. So again, I lifted my head, and there were 2 female forms either side of me. And they got their hands over my body. They were kind of like just slowly hovering their hands over my body. I felt the energy that was coming from their hands was just really powerful. It was like I felt love coming from their hands, actually. And it was causing like a vibration to go throughout my body that was just sending this energy throughout, you know, and they were healing my body, but not only my body and the physical wounds that I'd just been through, but I felt like my soul was being healed as well. I felt like all the years of baggage that I'd been carrying with me that I talked about earlier, all the feelings of guilt and shame and all those things were just being slowly peeled off one by one, and they were just getting down to the pure essence of my soul and healing that. So it was a wonderful feeling. I'd never felt like that before in my life. I'd never reached that point ever or come anywhere close to it. So I decided just to accept what was happening and just allow all this love to keep coming through. I started to think about my family, and I started to wonder how they were, because I knew that they were really pretty distressed down in the hospital, emergency departments, and I thought, I'm going to try and see if I could see them, and because they're going to be really cut up now, because clearly I would have passed on. So I edged myself over this kind of big rock, and I was hoping to see them, and I kind of looked over my left and looked down, and I didn't actually see them at all. But what I did see was this remarkable sight. It was like I was looking into a huge waterfall of stars, the size of, say, Niagara Falls. You know, it was like incredibly large, and it was incredibly awesome. But instead of tons and tons of water spilling over the edge, it was millions of stars that were just spilling over and sparkling, and there were like shooting stars falling through the middle. And I just kind of looked down, and the further I looked, you know, I found that my gaze was kind of like opening up, and I felt like I was looking into one galaxy, then into another, then into infinity. You know, I was looking into, I was seeing colours, I was seeing nebulas, I was seeing all these beautiful images that I'd never seen before in my life. And at this point, I got it straight away that I wasn't at all in a darkened space, that I was in the universe itself, and I was very much a part of that universe, and I felt very energized by that as well. It was very exciting to feel that energy. Yeah, a lot of people do ask me that question, and basically my answer to it is that it's ultra real. It's another dimension, but it's as real as we're sat here chatting to each other now. You know, it's as three-dimensional as that. But it just, everything's like so ultra real that it's stayed with me now. I've never forgotten any of it, and The difference as well is that there's no sense of time. Time doesn't exist. It's like there's no past and there's no future. There's only the present moment. And that is something that's really great, you know, because just to be in that present moment was like fantastic, because I realized that I'd spent all my years prior to that living in both the past, worrying about all the mistakes I'd made and worrying about all the opportunities that I'd missed and thinking about them all the time, and worrying about the future, worrying about where, especially because I was down to that last £10, what was going to happen next, you know, in my life. Whereas in this space, it didn't matter, you know, time did not exist. So you're just quite happy to be in the moment and be in that presence. Also, the difference with dreams is that dreams are more chaotic, and not only that, with time, the storyline kind of tends to drift and alter. You know, if you've had a very strong dream and you've remembered it over the years, you know, it tends to like fade or change. Whereas with a near-death experience, it remains exactly as clear to me now as it was. Every time I recall the story, you know, it's very easy for me to revisit it, because it was just so real. So it was interesting, because I remember lifting my head back over, and me of old would have been thinking, oh my goodness, I can't see my family, you know, I would have been really distressed. But I didn't feel that distressed. It wasn't like I didn't care, I didn't love them. There was no irrational feelings. All I could feel was, okay, I will be seeing them at some point, and if I don't, they're going to be experiencing all this beauty that I am, and they're going to love it. So I laid my head back, and I was still being continued to heal. Then I felt this energy had suddenly been turned up. I felt like this energy of love that was coming from their hands had suddenly, it was intensified by tenfold, in fact. And I decided to lift my head to see what was going on. And what I saw was just behind the being at my feet was a huge tunnel of white light that was like coming closer and closer to me, and it's circling with flames. There were flames that were circling all around the sort of edge of this huge tunnel of white light. And again, it was the same whiteness that was in these grids, but it was a lot more powerful and a lot more intense. And the energy that was coming from it was just causing every single molecule of my body to vibrate with love and happiness. And I knew at this point that what I was looking at, what I was staring at, was the source of all creation. To me, this was God that I was looking at, and not the image of God that I had always been used to, like in Christian form, for example, the guy with the beard, you know, on the ceiling of the Vatican in Rome. This was like a huge tunnel of energy, a huge tunnel of white light with these dramatic flames that were circling around. I remember I just put my head back and I was laughing to myself, because this was the most profound moment of the whole experience. And it was pretty much at that point that I came rushing straight back into my body. I was back in the hospital. The pain suddenly came all the way through my body. I felt it from my feet up, and the light was unbearable. I couldn't look into it, and then the noise was like overkill in my ears. It was like I wanted to turn the volume down. So there I was, back in my body. I was still in the A&E department, we'd call it in the UK, which is like the emergency department, when I had my near-death experience. So they hadn't actually put me under anaesthetic or anything like that. So I was still busy basically trying to save my life, I guess, at that stage. As I say, they were very frantic, and there was so much blood all over the floor. I remember my sister saying afterwards, she said we were almost slipping over on it because there was so much. And she said, and they were really desperately trying to save the amount of blood loss that was going on. But all I know is I wasn't under heavy medication at that point, because I decided I wanted to write my story, and I thought before I start writing my story in a book, I want to get all my medical records and get somebody to look over them, because a friend of mine is a trained nurse, and I said, will you look through all these? If I pay to get them from the hospital, will you look through them all? Which he did. And so at the time that I'd had my near-death experience, I was not taking anything at all that would have been hallucinogenic, let's say, or caused me to go into any form of dream state or what have you. And it's interesting because When I first came round from, because they took me straight into the operating room after I'd had the near-death experience. And I remember coming around from the anaesthetic that night, and I was in the hospital room on my own. They'd given me my own room, and I got two things that I'd got to deal with. One was the after effect of going through that huge accident, what had just happened to me. I was in pain. I couldn't move. I'd got tubes coming out of me and everything. And but the other most important thing was that I just had this incredible experience that I knew nothing about. I'd never heard of near-death experiences. And so I was scared at that point that I was going to forget it. I thought everyone's got to know about this. So it was very important right from the start for me to tell people. But I didn't actually talk to any of the surgeons or consultants who were working on me in the hospital about my near-death experience. I tried to broach it a couple of times, but they're scientists. And so they kind of closed me down on the subject, basically. But I told my sister, first of all, she came in to visit me, and I'm very close to her, so I figured she'd be the first to tell. She was just totally fascinated by the whole story. She said she'd seen a change in me anyhow, and I said, in what way? Because she knew that what I'd been going through in my life, that I was drinking heavily at that point, that I was going through hard times, And then she said, suddenly, you're just it's like you've been released from all that. And she said, you're just so peaceful, and you're just giving out this lovely peaceful glow. So she got it. She understood that something had happened, and she didn't question it at all. So once I told her, it made it a lot easier to tell other people, because I wanted everyone to get it, really. It took me about a week to tell my parents. They came in to visit, and the reason being was because they're both Christian and they were going to church. And I kind of thought, well, it might jar with their faith and with their religion, and they might not get it. And I wanted them to get it because it was important to me for them to understand it. And that was really incredible, because they both sat there and I told them the whole story of what had happened. And they both sat there and listened. And then my mother turned around straight afterwards, and she said very calmly, she put her hand on me and she said, "David, we know." And it was like a mother's instinct. And I said, "How do you know?" I said, "That's remarkable." She said, "David, whenever we come in, we walk into this room and you're surrounded by nurses. You've got tubes coming out of you, wires everywhere, you can't move, but you're just glowing. You've got this glowing light to you. And not only that, you're giving out all this care and love to everybody around you, whereas you're the one that's laid out flat on this bed, but you're giving out energy to us, your friends, and to the nurses." Then other friends would come to visit me from London, from all different walks of life, and a couple of the guys I'd worked on the construction sites with, and I told them, I told everybody, and everyone got it. Nobody questioned it and thought it was a bit crazy or anything. People were saying, "Yeah, well, you just seem so animated," is what one of my friends said. So there was. It's interesting because also I remember feeling at that point that even though I was back on the earth plane and I was in that hospital bed, I felt that the energy was still very powerful, that I felt like I'd still got a connection with that other realm, as it were, and I felt like they were still sending energy through to me. They were still healing me. But it is a different dimension, so you've got to try your best to put words in there that can describe that dimension and that feeling. Like when I talked about that feeling of the unconditional love going through my body, it was hard for me at first to say it. I remember telling people my whole body was vibrating, and everyone was kind of going, "Wow, that sounds really strange." But then I thought, well, no, it was like, it wasn't just my body was vibrating, it was just like every single molecule, as I say, was vibrating. So there are times when it's hard to describe it, but I do my best. So that made it a lot easier for me to be able to talk about it, because it felt like this was the new me. There's no going back. And a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you must have been disappointed because I didn't make the decision to come back." They said, "Oh, you must have been, it sounded great where you were." And I said, "No, I wasn't disappointed. I was just filled with all this love and excitement. And I thought, what is my mission? Why have they sent me back? What am I supposed to be doing now?" And that's all I could think of when I was in hospital recovering. I've spoken to other people who've had near-death experiences, and it's the same for all of us, and that is that you come back from this realm which is filled with love, and you're given all this unconditional love. The trouble is that it's very hard to move into society, into the world, and be able to be like that and be accepted and accept that not everyone else is going to get it. So I hit depression actually, because I realised then that it was almost impossible for me to fit into the world with all this love that I wanted to give out. So, you know, it wasn't all easy, and it's not, you don't come back superhuman, you know, you come back and you're back into your human body and filled with emotions. And not only that, obviously, my mind and body had been through a massive experience, and I was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, so all those things were there. But ultimately, what had happened to me never left me, and I knew that I was being helped to sort of steer my way through all this kind of, well, society, I guess, yeah. And as I said earlier, I was scared I was going to forget all this, and I thought, how am I going to, I've got to document this somehow. And I thought, I know what, I'm going to do a painting. I'm going to do a huge painting like the biblical scenes that the Renaissance paintings did. You know, I wanted something as powerful as that. Even though I'd never done anything like that in my life, I thought that's what I'm going to do, because that's how I can tell the world, you know, what had happened. So I remember my sister came in on the very first night, and she said, is there anything I can bring you into the hospital when I come tomorrow? I said, yeah, can you get me a small sketch pad and a pencil? And she went, okay, you know, she didn't know why. And I remember the nurses kind of propped me up, and I did this very faint sketch of the outline of what had happened that I intended to paint. And I've still got that sketch, and you can barely see it, you know, because I was so weak, but there you go. So when I got out of hospital, that's one of the first things that I decided I wanted to do, was start this painting. I got myself a huge canvas. So there it was, leaning against the wall, and I was dying to get started on it, but I was also scared that I wasn't going to be able to do this because I got no training in this, and I didn't want to mess this up. But a friend of my sister's came in and to visit, and her and her husband run like a yoga Pilates center, and they said, look, we've got some studio space spare this week. Why don't you come do your painting there? You've got no excuse now. So I said, okay. So I went in there, and I was there for a week, and by the end of that week, of course, I was nowhere near finished. But what was happening was this painting was coming alive, you know. It was just the colours that were going onto the canvas were immediately powerful, and they were happening. And I knew straight away that I was getting help to do this. I was like what I call channeling help from somewhere else, and it was just helping me to create this image of what I'd seen. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I'd stopped all that because I'd learnt when I talked earlier about being in that near-death experience that I was in the moment, and that they'd peeled all the layers off, and then it was just the pure essence of my soul. And what I came back with was a feeling of love, that I was loved. It made me sort of feel love for myself when I came back. And once I got that self-love, then I found self-worth. And I stopped acting, if you like. I stopped aspiring to be something else or somebody else. I just thought, no, I just allowed myself to be me for the first time in my life. It started with those paintings, because when I started the paintings, I became prolific. And while I was up in that attic space, in that small studio painting, a lot of people who were coming into the yoga Pilates sessions got to know about me. You know, I was called the artist in the attic, and they used to come up and look at my paintings, and I talk about what was going on there. And so it helped me sort of realize that my true voice was coming through for the first time in my life, and that people wanted to hear about it. And I thought, well, this works, this is right, you know. And it's interesting, once I'd found that authentic voice, doors started to open for me. You know, I started meeting people who were coming up and seeing my paintings, who became very sort of important people in my life, for new things to come in that made my life more livable. But you don't have to have a dramatic accident like mine. You don't have to have a near-death experience to find this self-love. I realise now just how many people are doing what I was doing before, that people are, I would call, acting. We have to act to be able to fight our way through different societies and make our lives palatable and work for us and stuff. I used to turn around to myself and say, how do you do life? How do people do it? How do they get these careers? How do they get these breakthroughs? How do they get the fantastic car and the house and what have you? And whereas I realise now that if you stop acting, your best will come through you. We look at brilliant sportsmen or brilliant musicians. Say, for example, we take Okay, let's take somebody like Jimi Hendrix or Mary J. Blige, you know, as performers. They don't act, you know, their performance is coming from another place. It's coming from within. It's authentically them, and we're really drawn to that. We love watching those people because every time we watch them, we go, oh wow, this guy's amazing. He's the best guitarist because he's playing from the soul. He's channeling. I remember seeing an interview with the runner Usain Bolt, and I remember he'd just broken the world record, and they interviewed him straight afterwards, and he stood there. He's the fastest man in the world, and they say, how did you feel when you were doing that race? And he said, I was relaxed. I felt really relaxed, and I thought, there you go, there's the answer. That's it. He's being authentic. He's just kind of like relaxing and allowing himself to enjoy that race, and then he won it, and he's the fastest man in the world. So I guess what I'm trying to say, what I learned from the near-death experience is to be in the moment and just try and stop worrying about the future, stop worrying about the past, and just allow yourself space. If we look around us, the moment we're in now is okay, and accept it. For example, it's like we've got two choices when we're driving our cars, when we come up to a red light at a traffic light. If we're going to a busy meeting, and we can either sit there and get frustrated and go, no, it's a red light, I'm going to be a minute late, 2 minutes late or whatever, or we can accept it and go, you know what, it's 2 minutes, so what, it doesn't matter, you know. I may as well just enjoy this moment and appreciate what's going on, or just stop and be in the moment. So that's what I try and encourage people to do, because we're all thinking, no, I haven't got time to meditate. No, I have not got time for that. I'm too busy. My life is too hectic, you know. But we've all got time to stop. And spiritual healing was great for me. That's something I would recommend. That's a great starting point, because it's the nearest I come to being in that other realm. You know, when I'm sat there, it's a very peaceful experience. You normally have two healers working on you. You feel the energy coming through their guides or through my guides, through their hands and through my body, and it's a magical experience, and you just kind of feel like you feel in touch with yourself, and you feel that it doesn't matter about that next meeting you've got, or all the cares or the worries, and then suddenly you come away and you can make things happen for yourself. And in fact, when I was having those spiritual healing sessions, I was being told by a few of them, because a few of them are mediums, and they'd get a few messages through, and they were saying, I'm seeing a violin laid across your chest, or I'm hearing music, Beethoven. I said, I don't know. Then one of them said, you're going to write a piece of music about your experience. I went, great. But I knew nothing about classical music, and I got no training in it whatsoever. So that came from going to spiritual healing, that I gained that message. And I went home and I started writing on a very old cheap synthesizer that I'd got. And I started writing this music, and this evolved into something that, like the painting, it became bigger than me, and it started becoming, I thought this could be performed by an orchestra. So my authentic voice came through. Because the first piece that I'd written, it was called The Divine Light, and it was actually about my near-death experience. And I allowed myself to keep working on it. I had no ambition like, wow, this is going to be big, I'm going to make lots of money. I just let it evolve. And one of the people who used to come up and see me paint was a cello player. And she was in an orchestra, and she came along and she said, look, what are you up to these days? And we went for coffee, and I said, I'm writing this piece of music based on my spiritual experience. And she said, oh, great. And I said, it sounds like it should be played by an orchestra. And she said, maybe we could do it one day. And I thought, why not? So they agreed to do it, you know. So again, synchronicity, because I wasn't pushing for it, those doors opened and those people came into my pathway. And before I knew it, it was being performed to a sellout audience and a standing ovation. And I remember the conductor's baton coming down slowly, and the opening chords that I'd written on this little cheap Spanish synthesizer were now coming through from a full orchestra, and it was like this three-dimensional sound filled the room, and it sounded absolutely beautiful. It was just as I'd heard it in my head, and all that because I let it grow at its own accord. I just let it develop and flower naturally, and nurtured it, I guess. There's nothing wrong with ambition. I'm not saying you shouldn't have ambition, but it's just that things will happen in a much more authentic and beautiful way if you just allow it. Well, to give an example, my mother passed 2 years ago, and I remember her passing really well, because she had a heart attack, and we took her into hospital, and it wasn't a major one. But so I remember spending that evening in hospital talking to her, and we both told each other how much we loved her. And then I got a phone call the next morning from the hospital off a very frantic sounding doctor saying, "You've got to come in now. Your mother's had a massive heart attack." I said, "Okay." I remember getting in the car, and I put the key in the ignition, and I got a 25-minute drive or whatever against to the same hospital. And when I turned the key, a beautiful piece of music came on the radio by Mahler, Gustav Mahler, his Fifth Symphony, which I totally loved. And I knew at that moment that my mother had passed, because I felt like my guides had put that there to help me feel calm for that drive. And when I did get to the hospital, she had passed. And as a family, we just said our goodbyes to her individually. And when I said my goodbyes to her, I remember I kissed her forehead, and then I said, "Well, Mum, you're just going to love it where you're going now, or where you are now. You're going to love it." Yeah, and I knew she would. And so obviously I was grieving over the loss of the mother that raised me and brought me through life. But it helped me so much to know that her soul had just moved on, because basically from my perspective, you know, the soul is far too powerful an entity just to suddenly die. Yes, the body stops and it slowly fades and dies, whereas the soul is just too strong, and it just continues onto that next realm. And so it gives me faith to know that not only for myself, but yeah, when others pass, that they're in safe hands and in the best possible place. It's a great question, that, because the way I see it is that yes, that other realm, it was beautiful, and it was the pure essence of my soul, and I felt at peace and I felt at one. And when I did come back, of course, all the challenges were still there, as I say, within society. But there has to be adversity, unfortunately. Without adversity, there's no new growth, and there's no getting around it. I mean, the only thing I will say is, because I get people who do write to me, and they are suffering from depression and having hard times, and I take a lot of time to try and answer. But what I do say is that before any adversity that came into my life, I would just try and jump over it. You know, I would just keep my life as linear as possible, which is crazy, because you're just trying to suppress something that's only going to come to the surface and get bigger. Whereas now, you know, any adversities that happen in my life, I try to go straight into the moment and think, okay, so an obstacle is ahead of me now, there's some adversity is about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. If I stop and be in the moment and look around me, it's okay, I'm all right. I'm still feeling all right. I'm not being grabbed by the throat and being throttled, you know, I'm okay. So it's just trying to do that, just trying very hard just to sort of grab that moment. And going back to that incident about talking about death, about the anticipation of death is far worse than the reality. The same with life, you know. We anticipate the worst. We always give a story of what's going to happen next, and that story is always going to be the worst possible scenario. So we don't. Half the time, it's not. You know. I feel like we're all part of the universe. You know, when I was in that realm, I felt we are all part of that universe, and the universe ultimately wants us to create and keep recreating. It does with nature. You know, all the seasons change. You know, and it's just creation that's just evolving at all times. The universe is moving forward all the times, and so are we. And again, looking back on my life before, I had no faith whatsoever. There was only one point that I remember praying, and that was when I got the eviction letter through the door, and I opened my fridge door, and all I got in the fridge was one bottle of beer, and I thought, shall I open it or not? And I just, at that point, I just put my hands together and I prayed, and I was praying like desperately, but I didn't even know who or what I was praying to. And it's interesting because my prayers were so desperate, it's almost like I wasn't allowing any energy to come back. I was holding one hand up at the same time saying, I'm not worthy, I know it's all my fault, but can you help me, you know? Whereas now I realise from the near-death experience itself that we are all loved, you know, that we've all got our own guides, or we've all got these spirit guides that are around us like I got up there, and they're with us all the time. In fact, my guides have been with me throughout my whole life. That's how I recognise that first initial androgynous being, you know. So we've all got our guides and we're all loved. But just to remember also that if we ask for help, we can just ask for it very basically. We don't need to grasp our hands together and ask out of desperation, you know. And also, the most important thing is not to be feeling what I felt. Don't feel guilt or shame or like you're not worthy or you're a sinner, that you've sinned. You know, forget all that, because that's not what it's about, you know, because in the other realm, the God that I saw is all about love, of giving love to you, and there's no judgment whatsoever. Nobody's judged. So just let all that sense of judgment go, and all the, because we all do it. We all go through life judging ourselves, and secretly we may not show it to others, but we do. But just let all that go, and just allow the love to come in. And when that love comes in, boy, it makes such a difference. You know, you just kind of stop, and you stop rushing around, and you stop trying to push doors open, and all that love will start to creep in and allow you to be your true self. And when you see your true self, it's a great feeling. It's the greatest love of all.